Hello, everyone. This is our second annual International Systems Pre-College Systems Thinking Symposium. It is virtual, as you can tell. You're all here on Zoom and free. Everything we do with our System Dynamics Society pre-college special interest group is always free. And we are really glad to have you coming. We have some very good presentations I think you will enjoy. And let me share my screen right now for a minute. Hmm. So again, this is what we are providing this symposium today. And if you will please make sure that your full name is in the Zoom window with your the little box identifying you that helps us speak to each other and know who is attending, although we can do that with some other methods as well. If English is not your native language, then you can set up translations in the captions, which is in the on the right. Let's see, this looks a little different than what I'm used to. Let's see, I'm looking for captions, breakout rooms. Where are captions, Emery? I don't see
Captions,
them.
maybe under the more button, it's
I looked there. There's transcript
show
breakouts
captions, CC.
down at the bottom.
Yes, down
Share.
at
Second
the
one
bottom.
in the more section.
It's in the more section.
Yes,
Okay,
I hope.
so you should keep English as the spoken language because all the presentations will be done in English. And then you can set up the captions language in your native language if you prefer, if English is not your native language. This is the structure of the symposium. We will have a recorded keynote from Peter Senge. When we started out, he thought he could be here in person, but after a few months, he realized he had to be on a plane at this time. So he recorded a 30-minute video for us that will act as our keynote. And then we will have a little bit of time, 10 minutes or so afterwards for any conversation that we would like to have about his keynote. We have three breakout rooms. The first room is for early childhood and primary school level. The second room is for middle and high school level. And the third room is for higher education and research. And we will have, after Peter Senge's keynote, we will have two parallels. If there are two speakers, they will each speak for 10 minutes at the beginning, and then there will be 10 minutes for question and answer. If there's only one speaker, that speaker has selected to speak for 15 or 20 minutes, leaving at least 10 minutes for question and answer. At the end of the two parallels, we will have a networking session. You will stay within your thread that you designated was your interest thread, and we will have facilitators talking about there are the same questions in each of the rooms. How can I start using system dynamics in my classroom, and what can go wrong for each of the three levels? Then after, sorry, that's this slide. And then after the networking session, we will have a plenary session by Sarah Chung, who has done some wonderful work in St. Louis with students, especially those more disadvantaged students using systems thinking. And she will speak for maybe 20 minutes and have a little bit of time for questions and answers. Then we will have two more parallel sessions. And then we have a 45-minute panel at the end on systems thinking in international baccalaureate. So that's the structure of the 5 hours that we are providing for you. Our keynote speaker is Peter Senge, and he is very well known in the systems thinking arena. And you know perhaps some of his books, The Fifth Discipline, Schools That Learn, The Necessary Revolution. And so what we would like to do now is to watch his presentation, his video presentation.
Good day to all of you. I apologize for having to be part of this gathering virtually through some bad planning on my part. At the time of this actual event, I'm going to be on an airplane traveling to have a holiday out western part of the United States. So my name is Peter Senge, and I'm really happy everyone was in agreement that I could just record this in advance. This special interest group on pre-college education has been an important part of the System Dynamics Society for a long time. I've been involved on and off over the years. I was really delighted to be invited to kind of address you all and share a little bit what we've been learning. And the focus that we came up with is, well, what have we been learning about how to infuse system thinking and system dynamics into curriculum in whatever country, knowing that it's going to be obviously different in different countries. All countries have their own ways of organizing their education. Yet, in another way, through the industrial age and the modern society we live in, the different education systems around the world are actually remarkably similar. It's not a coincidence. I remember years ago taking groups of American educators who were really interested in systems thinking to China. None of them spoke Chinese, but I remember visiting classrooms and they looked at the books and said, "Oh, we know these books." And then they heard how the teachers were teaching. "Oh, no, we know that pedagogy." And it turns out that the education schools, the schools that train the teachers in China, are very Western, even though obviously China is an example of a country that has actually a very long, many millennia tradition of education, all of which basically was thrown out when China was colonized and then eventually westernized. So this modern industrial age education system is actually remarkably similar, even though the particulars, of course, are very different. Both are important, the commonalities, but also the distinctions. So in this question, what is it? What are we learning about infusing system dynamics and systems thinking in the day-to-day curriculum pedagogy of educators? We have to keep in mind both. There are certain commonalities and there are a lot of differences. So our little planning group, which included Diana Fisher and Steve Riddick and Don DeLant and Emre Göktepe from Turkey, had a really good conversation the other day to kind of lay out some of what our thinking is about this question. And obviously, these are my own reflections now, but I know the way we'll use this recording is after this is over, there'll be an open time for all of you to chat a little bit with the organizing planning group. So 2 or 3 things kind of jumped out as common experiences we've all had. First off is you try to work through existing networks. It's one thing to reach a teacher in a classroom, or even to have a focused effort on a school. It's another to reach more broadly. And to do that, you really have to build on existing networks. Now, those networks could be around particular approaches like project-based learning. There's a lot of work going on all around the world in project-based learning, and there's various networks of people doing project-based learning, very often, of course, in the sciences. So you could obviously work in coordination, as we've done, with PBL, project-based learning networks. There also are various education systems. The one I know best is the IB, the International Baccalaureate, which has about 6,000 programs around the world in, I think, way over 100 countries. Most of the countries in the world have IB programs. And the IB, which is an organization that's based in Holland and coordinates all this education activity at all levels, primary, middle, and secondary education. is very interesting because the kind of philosophy of the IB is they focus a lot on what they call the learner profile. What are we trying to accomplish? How would we know that a student had a good IB education at whatever level? Um, and yes, that might involve various tests and so on, but there's less emphasis on the test, you might say, kind of a mechanism than the ideas. What does it mean? A typical phrase you'll encounter in the IB is globally minded citizens of the 21st century. They're really interested in global mindedness. Kids growing up with a sense that, yes, I may live in Turkey or United States or Denmark or West Africa, but I'm part of a global society. And being global mindedness is an example of an ideal or a value that the IB shares. So depending on how you go about this, you can connect around different things in established networks. I know the IB one quite well because 10 years ago we started what has grown into a series of experiments around the world with the help of a woman who was the head of curriculum alignment in the IB worldwide. She was based in The Hague in Holland, but she had been an educator in Dubai and India, and we had initially 10 schools involved that were in uh, Eastern Africa, Europe, the United States, Singapore, Switzerland. I mean, it was a very IB-like setting. The IB is a great example of a truly global network. And I think because they do a lot of research and they're not rigid in terms of here's the IB curriculum and we'll train you how to deliver it. They're again focused on basic features of what they call an IB education. Teachers have a lot of autonomy. One of the problems you encounter in a lot of education systems, I would say this is more common than not, it varies again by country and setting, is a lot of rigidity. Teachers in the US, for example, have very little time to do anything but deliver us the standardized curriculum. In some countries, it's even more extreme. It's extremely standardized. That's been, again, part of the industrial age model, standardization. Testing. How do we know the product actually meets specifications? Well, we test it. It's the industrial age assembly line model, which sits behind a lot of contemporary education still around the world. In that model, teachers have very little ability to innovate and very little space to experiment. In a network like the IB, it's quite different. Teachers have a lot of autonomy to develop their own curriculum. So these are, again, part of the idiosyncrasies. But when you're selecting different possible networks to work with, it's really good to find ones that philosophically, you might say, are aligned. There is no way that systems thinking and system dynamics can be well done, in my opinion, in a highly rigid curriculum. It is, in the end, about kids thinking, learning how to think in deeper, more interdependent ways. Kids developing their own sense of insight and intuition. All the educators I've ever worked with in this field have a very much learner-centered philosophy. Rather than teacher-centered, they really are trying to help kids develop and grow. And I think so it's very hard to squeeze system dynamics and systems thinking into a highly rigid pedagogy and curriculum. So when you're looking at these networks, you look for ones that are philosophically aligned. The networks can also be geographic. In our experience, the last 10 years, I've mainly worked with colleagues, a woman at MIT named Meta Bull and I developed something called the Compassionate Systems Framework. It's a particular synthesis of system thinking, what we often call system awareness, particularly social emotional learning and mindfulness. That approach has had a lot of broad impact in places like California and particularly British Columbia in Canada. Why those places, particularly British Columbia? Well, because they are a world leader on social emotional learning. So recognizing that while the social emotional aspects of learning are really important, they're kind of part of a larger worldview of interdependence, whether it's the interdependence of two friends or a team or a group of kids learning together or a classroom, that you might say the social reality, or they're the interdependence of our larger economic and ecological systems. So the idea that social, emotional, and systems learning go together is a very natural one in places where social emotional learning is well established and it's not just a superficial program. BC is probably the world leader at the scale of a province or a state in doing this. They also have a unique system I've not encountered anywhere in the world, and I've asked a lot of places, of literally tracking student well-being, not student performance, but student well-being. This starts in kindergarten. Every kindergarten teacher in the province of British Columbia is trained in administering what's called the Early Learner Index. Obviously, these are young kids, 5, 6 years old. They're not going to fill out test forms. So the teacher has to talk with them. Do you have multiple adults in your life who care for you? Do you have many adult relationships and student relationships in school that are meaningful for you? How do you feel about your life in general? Do you feel safe? Do you feel cared for? Really basic questions like this, which are they do through conversation and just observing kids and how the kids interact. Somewhere around the middle of the kindergarten year, usually January, February, the teachers throughout the province, all kindergarten teachers are trained in completing this early years instrument. Then when you get to middle years, there's in 5th grade, there's a whole nother instrument. This is one that kids make out themselves, but very similar in spirit. And all that and is now been integrated upstream. So the pediatric medical people also are doing a toddler, what they call the toddler instrument. How safe are the kids? How well cared for are the kids? And then that extends now right through secondary school. And there's even now an instrument in BC that's being used for people after they're out of secondary school, about the age of mid-20s. The net of all that is literally a population database for every child growing up in the province of British Columbia, all, of course, anonymized data, so you can't find about individuals. But in the city of Vancouver, you can disaggregate the data down to a 4-city block grid, and people can literally get together and look at the data for how their kids are doing. So that's an extraordinarily systemic perspective on child well-being, youth and children's well-being, not just their academic performance, and nobody in the world has anything quite like it. So we've always looked for networks we can connect with where there's a lot of philosophic alignment that reach broadly, involve lots of schools, lots of communities, lots of districts, but also are systemic in very fundamental ways. As I'm sure most of you know, we live in an era of a global crisis of youth, children, and young people's well-being. Suicide rates are historic, the second largest source of death of teenagers in most countries around the world today. And it's a huge issue. So when you can find people who are working in a systemic way, not just reacting to a problem like this, but trying to understand where does it come from and what can we be doing as a community, there's a lot of alignment there with the systems perspective. Many of you will recognize the system iceberg. We thought it'd be a good background for this. We use it today as we've used it for years. This is a slightly different version. It has a couple of wrinkles in it that are relevant to what we're talking about now. Obviously, the whole idea of the iceberg is what's above the surface, that 10% of the iceberg that floats above the waterline is what we all see, the events, the dramatic things, the breaking news that I just see on my gadget when I look at it, which arise from deeper patterns, trends over time that are not just immediate. They've been going on in many cases for years. And then the real point of system dynamics is to continually inquire into what are the underlying structures that shape these patterns or trends. The thing that's a little bit different here, and it's an evolution of the iceberg that you won't find in a lot of the versions that are used still today, is that the idea that the underlying structures arise from both mental models and artifacts. That term artifacts is one that comes from social theory. There's actually a very well-known British social theorist named Anthony Giddens who developed what he calls structuration theory. Structuration theory is basically the idea that human beings, just in our normal course of living, create structures. And these structures both are tangible, the metrics, the organization structures, the formal rules, policies, procedures. These are all what Giddens calls the artifacts. And intangible, the mental models, the assumptions, the ways of thinking and acting that we kind of take for granted, but are inevitably brought about. If we measure student test scores, after a while, people start to believe that education is about good test scores. That's a belief. That's not the measure. That's the belief that arises with the measure. And this is a self-reinforcing process. Artifacts and mental models are in this continuous dance, the tangible and the intangible aspects of social reality, which are the component or constituent elements of the underlying structures. So that's a way of understanding that can penetrate widely. This systems thinking iceberg, we now often call it the system awareness iceberg, is a common element, you might say a common language that spreads widely in these networks. So the two things that we want to start off with today in terms of what have we learned about infusing system dynamics and systems thinking is one, the idea that, well, to the extent possible, you work with existing networks, whether they're substantive ones like project-based learning or ones dedicated to a particular approach or philosophy, or they're geographic, like the system of education in British Columbia. In California, we've worked a lot with what's called the System of Support for Expanded Learning. It's a statewide network that involves about 5,000 community organizations around California that work with kids out of school, before school, after school, summers. As you might imagine, those kind of organizations are particularly important for reaching the most vulnerable kids. Particularly nowadays, a lot of kids don't go to school. How do you reach them? You reach them through community-based organizations. That's a network that's well developed in California. So, and then, so not only do you work with networks, then work with them on what? So it's very important. System dynamics, because of its MIT roots, has always tended towards a lot of tools and methods, which is great. I'm an engineer by training. I think tools and methods really matter. But so too do big ideas. And the systems thinking iceberg is a good example of a kind of a common idea. I always like this because people talk a lot about systems thinking and system awareness, and we need a systems approach. But what do they mean? How do you define what you're saying? The iceberg is a very elegant way to define a systems approach without using the word system. You'll notice the word system is nowhere on this picture. I think it's a first principle that you do not define a word by using the word. So it's very important to define what a systems approach means in a way that's intuitive, clear, and rigorous, and doesn't use the word system. So this is a kind of another key part of reaching broadly. You have to anchor what you do, not just in tools, not just in technical tools, but in ideas that really are intuitive and can spread widely. A lot of educators in a lot of places today use the system thinking or system awareness iceberg. In system dynamics, one of the key ideas that we've found, again, that has spread very widely is stocks and flows. In a funny way, we've tended to anchor a little bit more on stocks and flows than feedback loops even. They obviously go together. The system dynamics worldview basically starts with stocks and flows and feedback loop. But while feedback or reciprocal causality is critical, clearly to any systems view, it's also a little more advanced. So the one other point that we found ourselves returning to as we were going over and preparing this is the importance of kind of going upstream. What I mean by going upstream here is we've put a lot of attention on the early learners. In fact, we published a paper last fall in the major social emotional learning journal. It's called the CASEL, Collaborative for Academic Social and Emotional Learning, that's been a key network amongst social emotional learning in the United States. It's their main journey. It's called Journal of Social Emotional Learning, SEL, Practice and Policy and Practice. In any event, the idea that we wanted to write a paper about, it took a long time to get it through all the review process, and finally was published just last fall, is the innate systems intelligence of children. That children are born systems thinkers. They live in families, they grow up in communities, they immerse themselves naturally in the natural world. And all of these are the systemic realities, which is very intuitive to them. The problem is they didn't go to school, and most school is not systemic at all. It breaks everything up into separate subjects. It's about right answers and wrong answers, and a lot of competition, which is not a very good way to deal with social reality, win-lose competition. I got this test score, you got this test score, as opposed to learning together. So the problem is not the innate systems intelligence of kids, but the juxtaposition of that with a very non-systemic industrial age education system. So we wanted to point out that it's really important to think that human beings are systems thinkers by our nature. That doesn't mean we're all equally good at it. You might say we're all musical, but some of us have real gifts in music and some do not. But the more important point is, if kids were never given musical instruments, if they were never encouraged to sing or to dance, we wouldn't grow up developing this musical capacity. We have different innate skills, innate, you might say, levels of skill, but we're all musical. Music is part of the human inheritance. So too is system awareness. But it's sort of like education without musical instruments, you would not have many musicians. Education without systems thinking and system dynamics tools, you will not cultivate and develop that systems intelligence. So that's, again, a big idea. And I think we're at a point now, if we want to spread widely, we need a few core big ideas. Also, the other thing we've learned is that, and I think we're not unique in this, we all seem to have shared this, that in the way our education systems are organized, it's actually easier often to introduce systems thinking and system dynamics in the early years. By the time you get to secondary school, high school, subjects are very divided. The teachers are experts in those divided subjects. Working across the subject boundaries is very hard. Middle school gives a little more opportunity, but primary school is even easier. It's much easier to deal with interdependence in primary education. A good example of this is a practice that we found many kindergarten and first grade teachers do. They have kids use stocks and flows to think about what is it that makes a happy, healthy, safe classroom. Imagine the stock is a happy classroom. And the kids then think about what are the inflows and the outflows to that stock? What are the things that I do and we do that contribute to a happy classroom? Like we're nice to each other, or we listen to each other, or we take care of each other when somebody is hurt or unhappy. What are the things that deplete the stock? Well, we don't listen to each other. We're nasty. We harass. So the kids can really get into that. It becomes a wonderful practice, and we found many kindergarten teachers now do this, where they get the kids to first identify what constitutes a healthy classroom. Think of it as a stock. All children understand bathtubs, water flowing in, water flowing out, a bucket, sand going in, sand coming out. It doesn't matter. Accumulation is an intuition that virtually all children share by the age of 3 or 4, maybe even earlier. So it's very natural to have 5-year-olds thinking about the stock of a happy classroom and the inflows and the outflows. This is the one other thing that we started to realize when we were talking about what are we learning about diffusing or infusing system dynamics and systems thinking widely in education. A few basic practices. Kids thinking together about a happy classroom, kids thinking together about a safe school, kids thinking together about a community that's safe and healthy. These are natural questions for children at different ages. and think of those as stocks with inflows and outflows. Then it's quite possible to build up the feedback loops so that the natural one when you're dealing with a happy classroom is, well, if a happy classroom is one where children respect each other, and an inflow is gestures of respect. Oh, is there a reinforcing loop? The more I feel safe, the more I treat other kids well. And the more I treat kids well, the more we feel safe. So you can start to see that self-reinforcing loop. So we found that feedback loops build naturally when you have a clear idea of stocks and flows, which is exactly, in fact, the system dynamics philosophy, which really did start with Jay Forrester's insight that the processes of integration in mathematics, stocks and flows, were much more intuitive and easier to understand than the processes of differentiation as taught in differential calculus. And if you taught differential calculus from stocks and flows, Diana Fisher is a world leader on this subject, you could actually learn calculus much quicker and deeper. So that really reproduces the system dynamics philosophy. The stocks and flows are fundamental, and then you can build feedback relationships around those. And why not start with early learners? So that's the other big insight. If you think across the age spectrum and think practically about the way schools are organized, oftentimes there's a lot of leverage in starting with the early learners. The problem then, of course, is how does it diffuse and spread across the ages? That's a big challenge, and I think none of us are terribly happy with how broad the diffusion has been. I think you can think in terms of different subject areas like teaching calculus or teaching algebra or teaching a subject that everybody has in math or science, but you can also think about history. Wonderful examples of people using stocks and flows and feedback loops to think about history. So at that point, there's many forks in the road where you start to think of different subject areas. But if you can go upstream with the early learners, it does seem to be intuitively a much higher leverage way to reach larger scale. Then, of course, the other key element is research. There's a real paucity of good research on early learning, early learners and systems awareness or systems thinking. But there could be a lot more. We wanted to publish that article I was referring to, which again was published last fall, so that we could actually include a whole bunch of ideas about the types of research that need to be done. If we can start to see that sort of research occurring around the world, then a different feedback loop will start to occur. In the end, all of this work should be upstream in the teacher development process, in our education schools, in our pre-service training for teachers, and obviously in the in-service professional development for teachers. But that probably is not going to happen widely without research that shows the impact and analyzes good and effective practices versus ineffective ones. So there's a long-term journey of practice, research, and going upstream into the professional development and pre-service training of educators. So that is probably the big idea that we all share long-term in terms of how system dynamics and systems thinking can infuse education. Hopefully these ideas have been helpful to you, and you'll have a little time now to talk with Diana and M. Ray and Stephen and Don, the organizers of this session. Thank you very much for allowing me to give you this presentation virtually.
Okay. We were very fortunate that Peter agreed to speak to us. He opened up for some of us the idea of using this for social emotional learning. Maybe some of you have already thought of that, but are there any comments that people would like or observations that people would like to make about what Peter talked about? Things that you found insightful or helpful? and please use the raise your hand tool, which is the React tool. If you click on the React button at the bottom, you will have a little button that allows you to raise your hand so I can call on you. I can't see everyone on my screen at the same time, so I might miss you if you would like to speak and I can't see you. If you use the raise your hand button, then it puts you right at the top left of my screen and I can make sure to call on you. Anyone like to make any comments? Don?
Yeah, I'll just get started. So, kind of looking forward to the end of our symposium where we have this panel discussion. Peter mentioned the idea of building these networks to support and sustain systems thinking. But one thing he didn't really talk about is what do those networks need to accomplish? And I think that's one thing that maybe we can be thinking about kind of throughout the day and then circle back to it at the end of our symposium. So.
One thing we asked Peter, because some of us have been in this journey for a long time, and we have not seen the system dynamics, systems thinking approach that we are used to using spread very quickly. We asked him what were some of the paths that we maybe could take to be able to see more results. But I'm going to stop myself here because I'd rather listen to you all. Amy, would you like to say something?
Yes. I just had a question. In terms of the research that he says we need to have more of, I'm wondering if it's possible to combine more formal research at the university level with also maybe formal but more of an informal research where people across the world can have maybe the same format that they follow when doing some sort of research, within their kindergarten classroom, third grade classroom or whatever, and maybe upload it to some sort of networked site, and have it be more like a ground up informal research that may inform future I don't know. I didn't know if it was possible to have more of a formal research approach combined with an informal research approach to kind of jumpstart the research aspect of it, almost like a action research, a collective action research project.
Well, I am not in a university right now doing research. Do we have people who would like to respond to this particular question? Okay, Kim, do you want to respond to it?
I would like to respond to it.
Okay.
So there is a distinction made in between discipline-based education research and scholarship of teaching and learning. So discipline-based education research seeks to find generalizable principles that can scale widely, whereas scholarship of teaching and learning is much more focused and directed on improving performance in a classroom or a group of classrooms. And as it turns out, I represented geoscience education on a National Academy of Sciences consensus study on discipline-based education research. And we produced a really good book about discipline-based education research, which is available on the National Academy of Sciences page. And it talks a lot about how to establish a field of discipline-based education research, what's involved, how to sort of, what the reward structure should be, what kinds of questions exist. And we had representatives from geoscience education research, biology education research, physics education research, which is where discipline-based education research or deeper began, chemistry education research, engineering education research and astronomy-based education research, and nobody from systems dynamics whatsoever. We also did not have math education research. That's a somewhat different field. And that was a conscious decision on the part of the National Academy to try to make this be more manageable. But that's a really good resource, and it does talk some about the distinction between scholarship of teaching and learning and discipline-based education research. I'll put the link to it in the chat after I get done commenting. And I also was very enthusiastically responsive to Peter's suggestion that we need more research. I think both in cognitive research and in learning science research. And a model that we could turn to would be spatial thinking. So there has been a decades-long coordinated effort in spatial thinking. So that's how do people make meaning from shape, trajectory, size, orientation, and other kinds of spatial information about the world. And they're very well organized. They had a Science of Learning Center. There's tons and tons of papers. There's people who work on spatial thinking in geosciences and engineering and so on and so forth. So I offer those as two models, the discipline-based education research community and also the spatial thinking community as models that systems thinking could use to figure out how to move forward on the research trajectory.
Thank you, Kim. Did you not have another question? You were responding to the first question. Did you not have another question that you wanted to talk about?
No, what I wanted to say is, yay, research. Let's talk about education research. That was my main point to make.
We definitely need more education research, because the first time you go to a principal or someone in the schools who deals with the curriculum, the first thing they ask you is, well, where's the research that shows that this is such a spectacular way to learn, which those of us who have used it realize that it is an amazing way to learn. We need numbers to back it up, which means we also, go ahead.
I would say I completely agree. And it's a real chicken and egg kind of situation. So my psychologist collaborator and I had to write 4 NSF proposals before we could get our first proposal funded on the topic of how people think and learn about feedback loops. And the comments came back, your literature review is very weak. If nobody's been working on this topic, it can't be a very important topic. It's a very niche topic. And, when there's no literature, when there's no research literature, it's very hard to persuade people that this is an important research topic.
Yes, I agree. And we need also to look in other, because there's quite a bit of research being done in Turkey. And so I don't know how much of that research is in English, but it would be really nice to have some of that literature translated to English so it could be available. Okay, I'm going to change the topic. Jenny, would you like to indicate your question?
Yeah, it was a bit of a question and a bit of a comment. I thought it was just interesting what Peter said about the importance not just of the technical tools, but also the kind of engaging and enduring ideas and also issues and the sort of dispositions he was talking about. We're trying to design a course at the moment, and we've been kind of playing in that area and struggling with it a bit. So I'm really interested over the course of today how people see those more dispositional pieces, like intergenerational thinking, that go along with the kind of much harder kind of technical tools. So yeah, just a comment that I thought was interesting. He raised that need for both the kind of issues and sort of engaging ideas as well as the tools and the competencies, and how you make that triangle kind of work, really.
Thank you. I hope that you find some things today that will help you with that question. Amy?
Yes, I just had one more comment on when you look at leverage points, when you're putting ourselves into the systems that are already working on a systemic level. What I've been trying to do is I'm in South Florida, and I really would like to work with public schools because I think it's really hard to break into the public schools. Although I've been working at private schools most of my life, I find that with assessments, because everything really hinges on assessments and the data that they provide, I feel like it would be a really easy way to get into the system of the school, like the public school systems, with just tweaking systems thinking in a way that can assess what they're already learning with the standards. Because then they have a way to quantify what the kids are learning. And so that's kind of my new thing now, is to how can we turn this idea of systems thinking into an assessment, formative assessment, summative assessment, in a way that, that enhances what the teachers are already doing. And that's just one of my thoughts that related to what he was mentioning about, if you attach yourself, put yourself into a system that's already working, you have more of a leverage point to making a bigger difference. So I think assessments is a good way to start.
Absolutely. We did, as our group, come up with about 200 systems thinking assessment questions, and we have those available. But the point is more working within the curriculum itself. Really, we want the systems thinking tools to enhance the learning of the curriculum concepts that teachers are already trying to achieve, and not as a separate thing. A couple of things Emre has done, which is pretty amazing. There is a tool that he uses where he helps a teacher he's had some teachers he's worked with where they want to incorporate systems thinking into their classroom for specific concepts. And with the use of artificial intelligence, he sets up a kind of a flow chart that starts with the standards, the educational standards that the lesson is supposed to support, and goes through various stages and has artificial intelligence help on what's it. Emily, you want to talk about that, since it's your big deal and not mine? You could maybe show us an example.
Actually, we have a webinar on that. Maybe we can
Yes.
share the link, and it's an AI tool called TL Draw, based on Google Gemini, I think. You can put the prompts in a flowchart manner, and the output of one or more prompts can be fed into another prompt that again can be fed another one. You have a much more control over what the AI does. So I will share the link.
Is it possible for you to bring up a picture of the structure at all? I know you have your computer is very well organized, but we ask you these things from out of the blue, and you seem to be able to find them. But if you can't, that's okay. I'm putting you on the spot right here. We do have a webinar. We have all our webinars recorded at the System Dynamics Society pre-college SIG website. And we did one specially on this to see how, once you know a concept you're trying to help a teacher use to infuse system thinking, how you can go through the whole process of matching it to the standards, the educational standards that the lesson is supposed to support, and what kind of systems thinking tools you can use to support the lesson. And also, I think, assessments. So artificial intelligence is pretty good at creating assessment questions if you are very specific about the type of question you want to create. So that is definitely a possibility. Are you having difficulty finding it, Emery? Because this is not really very fair to you to ask you.
Well, here is the link for, and I'm trying to open it, but it takes time to get the link. I have to re-sign in again.
Okay, no, that's okay. Don't worry about it. He has put the link to the webinar in the chat. So please regularly throughout this symposium, save the chat. There are going to be a lot of really important links that get placed in the chat. So save the chat and you can look at it at a later time.
Well, I managed to open the page. If you have a couple of
Okay, go ahead.
Let's show it here. So this is the environment, and actually what we do is, this is for this is in Turkish, systems in our body, the subject, and we have this kind of images that shows what we will be teaching, and these are the outcomes that we want. And here is the prompt, and this is the first pass of the result of this prompt, and what might be done with how this lesson plan can be structured. And after taking this, feeding into another prompt, and using the output of this, the second one is to create a formative assessment, and the third one is the answers, expected answers of these questions, because and another one uses the previous one as a feed or as a continuation of the previous one. And so this goes all the subject details or subsections of the subject, and these questions are then, or expected with the expected answers, are feedback to a Moodle course that has again a different module connecting to AI that makes the student, that enables the student writes or draws the answer and sends both of them with the expected answer, and evaluates or assess the results with these expected answers, and tries to guide the student to expected outcome.
Thank you, Emery. And when we do our webinars, they are in English. So what in the webinar, did we not have all of this translated to English? Emery, do you remember? I think we had quite a few examples in English, didn't we?
Yes.
Yes.
The ones in the webinar were all English, but I wasn't the presenter, so I couldn't access those files. These are mine that are used in our lesson planning.
There's a lot in the chat that I have not been looking at. There's a lot of information on the research question and discipline-based education research. And so I'm not going to be able to respond to each of these. Faye says, I had second graders use multiple tools in authentic problem solving. They choose the iceberg and connections to make their case to the principal with success. They taught the teacher how to use the tools and kept asking for more problems to solve. That is pretty typical. The students seem to be able to pick up on the use of these tools a lot faster than the adults. And I think it's wonderful to have the students help the teacher, if the teacher is open to that, which we hope they are, find ways to use these tools to study problems. One of the things that I see as far as talking about research is finding classrooms, finding teachers with classrooms who are willing to partner with researchers to get the research done. And so that is kind of a problem. We only have 2 more minutes. I'm afraid we're going to run out of time for this conversation, but we can talk more about it when we get to the networking, because we want to connect you to each other. We really want you to meet people here that have the same interest as you do, which brought you to this symposium, and have you start to connect to each other and build a relationship on how to make this work, make this happen. So right now, I'm going to ask you to please go to your breakout room. Remember, breakout room 1 is for early childhood and primary, people interested in that level. Breakout room 2 is for middle and high school level. And breakout room 3 is for higher education, university, and research. So the 3 dots at the right of the toolbar will get you to show breakout rooms. And please go to, did you assign already, Emre, each of these people to a breakout room?
No, I just opened the breakout rooms, so each participant should join.
You
And
should.
people are free to move back and forth between
Yes.
the rooms.
Yes.
Right,
You can move back and forth. You don't have to stay in one breakout room, but please move. We want to start on time in our breakout rooms. Please move to the breakout rooms.